There is something deeply symbolic about looking at a figure who lived in the shadow of a miracle, and yet chose to be the bearer of silence, of quiet strength, of steadfast presence without ever seeking glory. Joseph, the carpenter, the man who, according to the Gospels, received in a dream the news that his pregnant fiancée was carrying not just a child, but a promise. And even in the face of disbelief, the natural confusion of any human placed before the impossible, he accepted. Not out of fear, not out of obligation, but out of a different kind of courage, one that arises when the heart opens to hear something greater than reason. Have you ever stopped to think about what is left unsaid, about what lingers in the spaces between words? In the Gospels, Joseph speaks very little. In fact, he barely speaks at all. And yet his actions echo like silent thunder through the centuries. He embraces Mary. He protects the child. He flees to Egypt under an angel's orders. He chooses the difficult path, not out of blind conviction, but out of a kind of faith that only someone who has lived in flesh and blood can understand. A faith that endures doubts, weariness, and unanswered questions. Joseph was not a mosaic, saint, perfect and untouchable. He was a man of flesh and bone, and perhaps that is precisely why he was chosen. How many times in our own journey do we feel like Joseph, present but invisible, active but without applause, carrying immense responsibilities while the world seems to notice only those who shine brighter? Joseph likely had those doubts. It's probable. But what defines a spiritually mature person is not the absence of doubt. It's the ability to press forward despite it. It's continuing to put one foot in front of the other, even when the heavens seem distant. And perhaps that is one of the greatest lessons we can take from him. The idea that the divine doesn't always manifest in grand miracles or celestial voices, but in everyday gestures, in small decisions made with integrity, in love expressed through constant care. Why did so many ancient cultures value paternal figures as spiritual guides? In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh was seen as the intermediary between the gods and the people. In Greece, Zeus was called the father of gods and men, representing authority and cosmic order. In India, Krishna is taught by his guru, Arjuna, who takes on the role of a spiritual father. In each of these traditions, there is a present archetype, one who leads, who shapes, who provides structure so that others may grow. And Joseph, though humble, may be the purest example of this, the guardian of a greater mystery, responsible for raising the one who would change the world. But what does it mean to be a father, truly? Not biologically, but energetically. Who are the spiritual fathers we encounter throughout life? Sometimes they come disguised as teachers, friends, books, or even enemies who force us to grow. Other times, they arrive unannounced, in moments when we need to hear something no one has ever said, but that we've always known deep inside. Have you ever had someone like that in your life? Someone who, without meaning to, illuminated a path you didn't even know existed. Who saw in you something you couldn't yet see yourself? Perhaps that person spoke little, like Joseph, or perhaps they acted simply, unaware of the profound impact they had. Because the true master doesn't always know they're a master. Sometimes they're just there, doing what needs to be done without expecting recognition. And that makes me wonder, how many times are we being spiritual fathers without realizing it? How many times are our actions, our choices, our silences shaping something greater than we imagine? Perhaps that's the most hidden secret of life, that everything we do resonates beyond ourselves in ways we don't understand now, but will one day make sense. If you're watching this video now, it's because perhaps the time has come to look at yourself with new eyes, to recognize that your story matters, that your role, however small it may seem, carries weight in the web of the whole. Joseph didn't preach, didn't perform miracles, didn't leave memorable speeches, but he existed, and in that perhaps lies the greatest miracle of all, the courage to be present. Before we continue, consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Together we'll explore ancient mysteries, hidden truths, and forgotten stories that carry wisdom capable of illuminating our present. This is just the beginning. There's an ancient Hindu legend about a king named Janaka known for his wisdom and inner mastery. He ruled not through power or force, but through a state of consciousness so elevated that his actions seemed to flow in harmony with the universe. One day, a sage visited his kingdom and asked, "How is it possible that you govern so many lives without losing yourself in them?" And Janaka replied, "I know I am merely an instrument. The true ruler is something greater than me." This idea, that we are channels for something vaster, can help us better understand who Joseph was. He didn't try to shape Jesus in his own image. He didn't seek to impose authority or control. He simply created the conditions for something greater to grow. He was like a silent gardener, preparing the soil, watering the plants, protecting them from strong winds, but never deciding how they should bloom. His presence was necessary, but he knew he wasn't central. And perhaps that is one of the purest forms of love: to care without possession, to guide without dominating, to love without expecting anything in return. In Norse mythology, there's an intriguing figure called Mimir, guardian of the well of wisdom. It said he knew all the world's secrets but spoke little. He was a being of deep listening, and when he gave advice, it carried weight because each word was chosen with precision. In many ways, Joseph seems to have been like this, someone who listened more than he spoke, who observed more than he judged, who acted with intention, even when the world around him seemed chaotic. This makes me think, how often are we so focused on saying something important that we forget the value of simply being present? How often do we want to give grand lessons when what the other person really needs is someone who listens attentively? Joseph didn't write sacred books. He didn't found religions. But he was there at the right moment, fulfilling his role with humility and resolve. And perhaps that's what truly changes the world. People willing to do what needs to be done, even if no one notices. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision without knowing if it was right? One of those choices with no clear answer, only intuition? Joseph faced this multiple times, accepting Mary as his wife, fleeing to Egypt, changing cities, protecting the child. Each step was uncertain, yet he walked forward. Doesn't that sound familiar? How many times in life are we placed before a path we don't fully understand, but somehow feel is the right one to follow? Sometimes, the only guidance we have comes from the heart. And Joseph seems to have lived this way, guided by dreams, by signs, by a kind of faith that didn't rely on rational explanations. In the Egyptian tradition, there was a concept called Mat, the idea of cosmic order, universal balance. Pharaohs were responsible for upholding Mat, ensuring the world continued to turn in harmony. But it wasn't just kings who bore this duty. Every individual had, within themselves, the responsibility to live in alignment with this greater energy. And Joseph in some way seems to have embodied this, living in Mat even amidst chaos. It didn't matter if the circumstances made sense. What mattered was whether he remained faithful to what he felt was his purpose. And perhaps that's the essence of the spiritual journey. Not always seeking to understand everything, but trusting that even in the shadows, we are being guided by something greater. That our steps, however hesitant, are part of a design we can't yet see. Have you ever found yourself seeking too many answers? Felt that the more you tried to understand, the less you could feel? Joseph lived with intuitive faith, the kind that doesn't need concrete proof, only an inner certainty. And in that, perhaps he was a silent master of practical spirituality. Here's a question that runs through all ancient traditions. What defines a spiritual person? Is it someone who meditates for hours each day? Someone who lives isolated atop a mountain? Or could it be someone who, even in the midst of everyday life, working, supporting a family, facing challenges, manages to keep their heart open and their soul connected? Joseph was a carpenter. He worked with his hands. He taught Jesus the trade, patience, and attention to detail. Perhaps in those long hours of work, he taught more than techniques. Perhaps he passed on values. How to build something lasting, how to handle mistakes and correct them, how to accept that not everything turns out perfect the first time, and how to persist, even so. These are spiritual teachings disguised as practical skills. Because the Spirit doesn't live only in temples, it lives in gestures, in kind words, in daily actions. And Joseph, perhaps, was the first to show this to Jesus. Imagine this: young Jesus learning to wield a hammer, cut wood, plan a project, and at the same time, learning about discipline, respect for the timing of things, and serving others through his work. All of this without religious sermons, without elaborate rituals, just through example. How many parents today try to teach their children with words, but forget that the greatest lesson lies in their behavior? Joseph didn't need to say much. His love, his presence, his consistency were enough. And perhaps that's the greatest revelation, that the true spiritual legacy isn't in grand works or titles, but in how we make others feel. In how we touch lives, even without realizing it. In how we create space for others to shine, even if it means staying in the shadows. Have you ever stopped to think that you might be here to be exactly that for someone? An invisible support, a solid foundation, a point of stability so another soul can soar? Because that is the noblest mission, creating the conditions for the miracle to happen. And not demanding credit for it. If you've made it this far, consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. We'll keep exploring ancient stories, forgotten archetypes, and hidden truths that can illuminate our modern journey. This video is just a piece of a larger map, and there's still much ground to cover. But before we move on, I want to ask you a question that might completely shift how you see your own story. What if you are Joseph in some aspect of your life? What if you're nurturing something greater than you understand? Something that in the future might save someone? What are you cultivating today that years from now might save someone? Think about it. There's a certain stillness in the corners of history that, when we look closely, reveals more than the written word. Someone who never preached, who left no speeches recorded in sacred books, and yet carried a burden as great as any prophet. He walked beside the miracle and chose to stay, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but for something older than that, a kind of silent courage, almost imperceptible, known only to true guardians. Joseph, the man who, according to the Gospels, received a divine revelation in a dream and chose to believe it, even though it seemed absurd to the world's eyes. An angel appears in a dream and says, "Do not fear to take Mary as your wife." And he accepts, without asking why, without demanding proof. He simply follows. And perhaps that is one of the deepest forms of faith, the kind that arises before understanding, the kind of belief that springs from the heart, not the mind. How many times in life are we confronted with something that doesn't make rational sense but resonates within us as an unquestionable truth? Perhaps it's happened to you at some point. Maybe even now, as you hear these words, there's something inside urging to be heard. A calling, a desire, a purpose that finds no words but beats strongly in your chest. Joseph knew what that was. He lived between the human and the divine, between the mundane and the sacred. He worked as a carpenter, built houses, hammered nails, sanded wood, and at the same time he raised a child whose existence would change the course of humanity. An ordinary man, an extraordinary mission. And perhaps that's the greatest revelation, that the sacred often dwells in the simple, the common, the everyday. In Egyptian mythology there was Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, who maintained cosmic balance through silent knowledge. In Hinduism, Vishnu descends to earth as an avatar to restore order when chaos threatens the universe. In ancient Greece, Prometheus stole fire from the gods to give to humanity, knowing he'd be punished for it. In all these cultures, there are figures who bear immense responsibilities, but aren't always celebrated. They are those who serve without applause, who act without recognition, who shape destinies without ever taking center stage. Joseph seems to have been one of these figures. A man who didn't seek glory but was chosen for a unique mission. And that makes me wonder, how many Josephs have crossed our lives? How many people, without knowing, were there exactly when we needed them? Who embraced us when we were lost, gave us space when we needed to grow, and stood firm even when everything seemed to crumble? Because Joseph didn't preach. He didn't perform miracles. He didn't write parables, but he cared. He protected, he taught, he loved. And perhaps that is the true spiritual work, creating the conditions for another to awaken, to flourish, to find their own path, even if it means staying in the shadows. And here's a profound question. What does it mean to be a spiritual father? Not just biologically, but energetically. Who are those who in some way shaped us without even knowing, who guided us even unintentionally, who prepared us to soar, even if it meant letting us go? Joseph was that. A present father, but not oppressive. A constant guide, but not controlling. A man who knew how to honor the mystery without trying to dominate it. And perhaps that's the greatest wisdom, recognizing that not everything needs to be understood to be lived. Have you ever caught yourself wanting to explain everything, seeking answers for every uncertainty, desiring guarantees for every step? And yet sometimes the only real guidance came from the heart. Joseph seems to have lived this way, guided by dreams, by signs, by an inner voice that, though subtle, was firm. In the shamanic tradition, it's said that true masters don't speak much. They listen, they observe, and when they speak, each word carries weight because it comes from a place of silence. And Joseph seems to have been like this, someone who listened more than he spoke, who acted with integrity, who answered the call with actions, not empty promises. How often today are we so busy talking that we forget the power of listening, of being present, of noticing the signs the universe sends, disguised as coincidences, chance encounters, or inexplicable feelings? Joseph saw those signs, he heard the dreams, and even without fully understanding, he followed. He fled to Egypt, he changed cities, he protected the child, he built a home, and all of this without complaints, without seeking recognition, without demanding anything in return. Doesn't that sound familiar? How many of us are also being called to do something greater than we understand, something that, in the future, might change lives, but for now feels like just another task, a job, a relationship, a project, a mission no one sees but which carries an invisible weight? Perhaps you too are Joseph in some aspect of your life. Perhaps you're nurturing something whose magnitude you don't yet know. Perhaps you're planting something that will only bear fruit later, and perhaps for that reason you need patience. Faith, silence. Before we move on, consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Together we'll explore ancient mysteries, hidden stories, and truths that have crossed centuries to reach us. This is just the beginning. But before we go further, I want to ask you a question. One that lingers for days. One that might change how you see your own journey. What if you're here to be the guardian of something greater than you imagine? Think about it. If you've made it this far, I recommend leaving the word guardian in the comments if this reflection has touched something within you.